Hello, and thank you for joining today Local Housing Trust Fund Workshop. Today, you'll be hearing from Local Housing Trust Fund team members, Veronica, Danielle, Marie, and myself, Melanie. The topics we will be covering are general program overview, program requirements, application, submission, and appeals, award announcements, and contracts and department standard agreements. The general program overview will cover program purpose, program summary, notice of funding availability, timeline, and authorizing legislation and regulation. The Local Housing Trust Fund was established to provide matching funds through new and existing local housing trust funds. The department's objective is to expand sources of funding for housing and to expand the supply of affordable housing through the creation of new local housing trust funds and to support the ongoing operation of existing local housing trust funds. The Local Housing Trust Funds program provides matching grants to local housing trust funds that have developed their own eligible funding sources for housing. All program funds shall be matched on a dollar for dollar with qualified on deposits such as taxes, fees, loan repayment, or public and private contributions. Permanent local housing allocation may be considered matching funds for Regional Housing Trust Fund. The department is pleased to announce the release of this notice of funding availability for approximately $57 million. This will begin the first round of NOFA for this program. Funding for this NOFA is provided by the Veterans and Affordable Housing Bond Act of 2018, Proposition 1, and adopted by voters on November 6, 2018. The program funds shall be used to provide construction and/or permanent financing loans, to pay for construction or rehabilitation, emergency shelters, permanent supportive housing, transitional housing, and affordable homebuyer projects. Department NOFA was released on April 30th, 2020. All applications must be submitted by 11:59 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on August 3rd, 2020. Award announcements will take place around October 2020. Senate Bill 3 authorized Veterans and Affordable Act of 2018 and issuance of bonds and the allocation of $300 million of proceeds for the Local Housing Fund program specifically. SB 3 allowed the department to adopt guidelines instead of regulations. Those guidelines were finalized in April 2020. The Local Housing Trust Fund shall operate on ongoing private contributions and non-restricted governmental sources for housing programs. With that, I would hand it over to Veronica.
Hi, I'm Veronica, and I'll be discussing who's eligible to apply for funds from this program. Eligibility is limited to a city and county, Native American tribe or tribes that have created, funded, and operated an existing local housing trust fund or have created and funded a new local housing trust fund. Nonprofit organizations may also apply if they are in an existing local housing trust fund or new local housing trust fund. Let's get into a little more detail on what makes these entities eligible. In order for a local housing trust fund to be eligible, they must meet the following criteria. They must utilize a public or joint public and private fund. This fund must be established by legislation, ordinance, or resolution. They must also receive public/private special revenues addressing local housing needs. They must have eligible matching funds on deposit. and they must also be funded from ongoing revenues such as taxes, fees, loan repayments, or public or private contributions. Additionally, at the time of application submission, a housing element must have been adopted by the governing body and must later be found by the department to be in compliance with state housing element law. The applicant must also submit to the department the annual progress report for the current or prior year by the application deadline. In the case of a nonprofit housing trust fund or tribal housing trust fund, they must agree to utilize program funds only for eligible projects located within the cities or counties that have submitted an adopted housing element at the time of application, and it must later be found by the department to be in compliance with state housing element law, and for which the annual progress report was submitted for the current or prior year by the application deadline. In the case of an applicant being a regional housing trust fund, they must meet the minimum threshold of serving 2 jurisdictions with a combined population of more than 1 million people, 3 jurisdictions in counties with total populations of 250,000 or less, or 4 jurisdictions in counties with total populations of more than 250,000 people. They must also include more than 66% of the population of the county or counties. A new local housing trust fund is one that was organized, funded, and operated no more than 12 months prior to this NOFA release. The same rule will apply to the upcoming second round NOFA for local housing trust fund, except new will also mean a local housing trust fund that was created since the previous NOFA issue. The longer of the two will be the measure used. Now let's look at the eligible activities. Eligible activities for local housing trust fund funds include construction loans and/or permanent financing loans at simple interest rates not to exceed 3%. Funds may also be used for rental multifamily projects. Additionally, affordable ownership housing is eligible, including new construction of projects, down payment assistance, and owner-occupied rehabilitation. Accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units are included. Applicants can opt for a program activity that merely consists of developing or rehabilitating accessory dwelling units or junior accessory dwelling units without any other activity at that house. For example, no additional purchase or rehabilitation of the primary home. Funds may also be used for the costs associated with the development or rehabilitation of emergency shelters or transitional housing. After deducting administrative expenses, a minimum of 30% of program and matching funds must be used for extremely low-income households. Dwelling units or shelter beds must be affordable to and restricted for households with income not to exceed 30% of area median income. After deducting administrative expenses, a minimum of 20% of program and matching funds must be used for moderate income households whose household income does not exceed 120% of area median income. Remaining program and matching funds must be used for low-income households whose household income does not exceed 80% of area median income. Moving on to funding activity limits, an existing local housing trust fund cannot request less than $1 million. For new local housing trust funds that are not regional housing trust funds, the minimum is $500,000. For new local housing trust funds, which are regional housing trust funds and also utilizing PLHA funds as matching funds, the minimum is $750,000. The maximum amount for all applicants is $5 million. An important part of this program to understand is the matching funds requirement. Matching funds must be on deposit prior to the program fund disbursement and must be utilized on a dollar-for-dollar basis for the same eligible project for which program funds are used. In the event that a trust fund has sufficient matching funds in its account at the NOFA application deadline, but also has legally binding commitments to deposit additional sufficient matching funds prior to the disbursement of any program funds, the Department may permit the trust fund to deploy the original matching funds pending the Department's approval of the legally binding commitments to deposit additional sufficient matching funds. The ongoing revenues are required and may or may not be eligible matching funds. For a new housing trust fund, the ongoing revenue must be sufficient to pay for 5 years of operating costs following award. For existing housing trust funds, ongoing revenue must be at least an average of $100,000 per year for 3 years after award. With that, I'll hand it over to Danielle.
Hi, I'm Danielle, and I'll be covering a variety of topics, including program administrative costs, underwriting requirements, and a select portion of program and application requirements. I will also be explaining the rating and ranking process and the standard state and federal requirements mentioned in more detail in the NOFA. Based on the guideline section 105B, a local housing trust fund that receives an award under this NOFA shall not use more than 5% of the allocation and 5% of the matching funds for administrative costs. The standard underwriting requirements will apply, such as construction loans require development loan agreements, loan guidelines and underwriting standards must be submitted with the application, and for developing projects, HCD will send its funds to escrow. Those granted program funds must administer the local housing trust fund for at least 5 years after the program fund's award date. If the Housing Trust Fund stops operating during the 5-year period, then the Department will disencumber all remaining unencumbered funds. Grantees must have held or will hold a public hearing meeting on the eligible project to be funded. Repayments, interest, and fees derived from the loans of program funds shall be returned to the grantee's Housing Trust Fund and are required to be used for local Housing Trust Fund program eligible activities. An annual public hearing must be held to allow public comment on the projects the Housing Trust Fund is seeking to fund that year. An annual report is due by July 31st annually, and for more information on the specifics of that report, please see Section 112 of the guidelines. A 15% set-aside is required for the new Housing Trust Funds. Please be sure to submit a complete application using the forms on our website. You must have the application in before the deadline in order to be considered for funding. In the event that the amount of funding requested in complete and eligible applications exceeds the funds available, applications shall be evaluated and funded using particular criteria outlined starting on page 4 of the NOFA. There will be a self-scoring tab on the application, so applicants will have an idea of what their score is when they turn in their application. I will go ahead and review those criteria now. The first opportunity for points is non-residential matching funds. Applicants will receive points based on the percentage of matching funds, specifically from sources other than residential local impact fees or in lieu fees. There is a minimum of 5 points and a maximum of 15 points in this category. The next opportunity is deeper income targeting. To receive the entire 20 points, applicants would commit 100% of their funding to lower income households. As you can see on the slide, the minimum action needed to receive the lowest amount of possible points, which is 5, requires a percentage of no more than 18% of funding being utilized for the moderate income households, and to receive the total amount of 20 points, applicants must commit to 100%. To score points in the readiness category, we are reviewing the extent to which an applicant has completed a first phase funding process. for a multifamily rental project or projects, and has announced on their website the status of each project, including those projects that were approved to submit a final application upon award of program funds by the department. Please note that the applications requesting funds solely for single-family activities will not receive any points in this category. The fourth criteria is how much of the applicant's funding will be committed to new construction of rental housing and restricted to households with 60% AMI or less. As you can see, in order to receive the minimum number of points, you must commit at least 51%, and in order to receive the full amount, you will need to commit 100%. The fifth criteria is community need. At a minimum, everyone will receive 5 points, and those jurisdictions most impacted will receive 15. A regional housing trust, for the purpose of these points, includes the following makeups. A, 6 jurisdictions and counties with total populations of 250 residents or less, or B, 8 jurisdictions and counties with a population of more than 250,000 residents, or that meet the minimum threshold, which is 2 jurisdictions with more than 1 million people, 3 jurisdictions and counties with total populations of 250,000 residents or less, or C, 4 jurisdictions and counties with more than 250,000 residents and include more than 66% of the populations of the county or counties. An important piece of information in regard to future NOFAs. HCD may assess negative points for applicants who received awards in prior years for applications in which they committed to deeper income targeting and/or to increase the supply of lower income rental housing, but did not expend funds committed to these activities. In the event of a tiebreaker, the department will rank tied applications based on the extent to which the application identifies specific multifamily rental projects for which the trust fund has issued letters of intent to developers for construction or permanent financing. In response to the governor's executive order, the department strongly encourages awardees to implement the local housing trust funded project in a manner that reduces greenhouse gas emissions and adapts to climate change. In addition, awardees must obtain specific information from local governments indicating the progress made in planning to adapt to climate change. Now you'll hear from Marie.
Hello, I'm Marie, and I'll be discussing the application and its submission, Q&A workshops, and appeals. After those topics are covered, I will be sharing important information about awards and contracts, which are available on the Local Housing Trust Fund page on the HCD website. Applicants must meet the requirements of Local Housing Trust Fund guidelines. Only complete applications submitted on or before the application deadline of August 3, 2020 will be considered for funding. In order to be considered complete, an application must have all the information requested and provide adequate documentation and information for the department to determine the Local Housing Trust Fund's eligibility for funding. If the total amount of funding requested by all applicants under a NOFA is less than the amount of funding available under the NOFA, the department may allow an applicant to submit additional or corrected information to amend an application and make it complete. Such amendments may not include a request for a higher funding amount. Application materials must be submitted electronically to the department's website. Requirements for uploading the application workbook and required supporting documentation, including naming conventions, are described in the application instructions available on the website listed on the screen. The application instructions and submittal portal will be available beginning July 15, 2020. The department no longer requires a hard copy submittal of the application workbooks or supplemental documentation. No faxes, incomplete applications, application revisions, or walk-in application packages will be accepted. Applications that do not meet the filing deadline requirements will not be eligible for funding. The only information the reviewer has about you and your project comes from what is submitted, so be sure the information submitted is clear and easy to understand. Before you hit send, confirm that the application is complete and accurate. When completing your application, please note the following. The yellow cells are for inputting information. Do not copy and paste into cells. The applicant must answer the questions in order as entered information flows into other cells that have formulas. Regarding formation documents, be sure to confirm that the application signatory is an authorized signer per the resolution. The department will conduct 2 Q&A webinars for the Local Housing Trust Fund program. Go to the Eventbrite link included in the listserv emailed the first week of May to register for a Q&A webinar of your choice. We're asking applicants to thoroughly review the application to see if there are any questions we can answer for you. We would like to gather questions in advance and discuss them during the Q&A webinar. If you have any questions regarding the NOFA, guidelines, or application, please send them to lhtf@hcd.ca.gov. Applicants are strongly encouraged to listen in to the Q&A workshops to gain information critical for preparing the application. We will post questions and answers from the webinars on the Local Housing Trust Fund webpage. If an application has been determined to be incomplete, ineligible, fails threshold, or has a reduction to the initial point score, applicants may appeal such decisions to the department. The appeal process applies solely to the decisions of the department made in the Local Housing Trust Fund Program NOFA and not for any past or future NOFA. Information provided in the application will become a public record available for review by the public. All materials provided will be obtainable to any person making a request about an application. The department cautions applicants to use discretion in providing information not specifically requested. By providing the information to the department, the applicant is waiving any claims of confidentiality and consents to the disclosure of submitted material upon request. Now let's discuss award announcements and contracts. All applications will be reviewed, and in the event the amount of requested funds from complete and eligible applications exceeds the funds available, applications will be evaluated and funded using the criteria that was shared with us earlier in the webinar. Applications meeting requirements will be forwarded to the Internal Loan Committee for approval. Approved applications will be sent an award letter. The department's goal is to get standard agreements out within 90 days. Once the standard agreement has been executed, our team's tasks will be complete and you will be assigned a staff person from the Grants and Management section. Awardees will be able to draw down funds when the standard agreement is fully executed and any general and special conditions have been cleared in writing. In addition, expenditures may not be incurred prior to the execution of the standard agreement. Grantees are responsible for administering and implementing the eligible projects as proposed in their application and must continue the operation of the Local Housing Trust Fund for at least 5 years after the program fund's award date. Grantees shall have held or shall hold a public hearing to discuss and describe the eligible projects that will be funded. Nonprofit grantees shall hold one public meeting per year that is open to the public, and a public notice of the meeting shall be posted on the nonprofit's website at least 10 days prior to the meeting. This meeting shall be for the purpose of discussing the criteria that will be used to select projects to be funded. Any program funds not encumbered by a grantee by a loan commitment to the developer of an eligible project within 60 months of the date of the executed state standard agreement shall be disencumbered by the department, and any program funds advanced to a grantee shall promptly be returned to the department. There is an annual report requirement which consists of ongoing tracking of the uses and expenditures of any allocated funds. This report is due each year and should be submitted to the department's Grant Management Division. Here are links to some of the resources we use throughout the presentation. You can also sign up for HCD updates on our website. You can select multiple programs on which to receive emailed news and updates. This way you won't miss out on anything new. You can also follow HCD on social media, which is a great way to stay informed on programs and updates. For any questions regarding the Local Housing Trust Fund program, email us at lhtf@hcd.ca.gov. Thank you.